Hello and welcome back to Build and Teach. In this tutorial we will be covering exception handling in Python. Now, what is an exception? An exception is an event that occurs during the execution of your program that will disrupt the normal flow of the program instructions. In other words, there is an error event during the program that disrupts its normal instructions. Now what Python does is it creates this exception object and it raises it and returns it as output of your program. Now this exception object contains information on the error that occurred during the execution of your program. Now exception handling is good practice when writing any program because it helps you handle unwanted behavior. Now Python brings a lot of built-in exceptions. We'll be looking at three of them. We'll be looking at syntax error, we'll be looking at type error, we'll be looking at zero division error, and we'll look at a link that contains all of the other built-in exceptions. We'll also learn in this tutorial how to raise our own exceptions with maybe more detailed text than the cryptic built-in exceptions. We'll also learn how to use assertions to handle unwanted behavior. An assertion returns an assertion exception, but they're easier to write. They're usually just one line. It's a more elegant way of handling errors. We'll also learn how to write, how to handle exceptions using the try, except, and final blocks, which will give you a little more control over how the program returns an exception, and it gives you a little more of a natural flow to your program. So let's take a look. I have a link here for the Python document, which has all of the built-in exceptions that are already built into Python. You can see there's a bunch here: memory errors, name errors, type errors, etc. We'll cover a few right now. Let's go into that. So in here, I have a very simple program that has an if statement, but it has an error in our syntax. Syntax errors are errors where Python expects like a semicolon or expects closed brackets or something like that, where you just made a mistake in the writing of the syntax of the program. So here, if I execute this code, you can see that Python is pretty helpful. It's pointing to where the syntax error occurred. So if you know if statements, you know that it expects a colon here. So if I fix that and I put the colon in there, notice that the syntax error doesn't happen. If I remove it, you'll see syntax error. So it's a way of helping you to debug your own programs, and they're very helpful. It actually points to the line where the error occurred. You can see here it's telling you that the error occurred here on line 3. So you can see that this exception object returns information on the error that you have in your program, and even the location of the error. In here I have another program. I have a hello world type of program, and if I and you can see here that I'm printing something. So when you print something, Python expects a string, but here I'm putting a boolean in there, and notice what happens. It tells me I have a type error because it's expecting a string, but I've put in a boolean. It also gave me another error here called the name error, because I have a named attribute right here, a named parameter right here, and it's expecting you to put some value in here that is of type string. Since I put of type boolean, it actually returns 2 errors, and it tells me where the issue is, and this would help me to debug and fix my program, right? So I can just say Henry here, and all of a sudden the program works, right? So it's a way of helping the programmer fix their own maybe typos or errors in their code. Another one we have here is division by zero. Division by zero usually occurs when you have some input value that you didn't mean it to be 0, but it returns 0, and division by 0 can't be done in math, so it will return to you division by 0 error. Okay, so we cover the built-in exceptions in Python. But what if you want to raise your own exception? What if the built-in exceptions do not cover the exception that you are seeing in your program? Now in this section, I created a class called bank account right here, and the bank account has a private variable of balance which starts off at 0. it gives I have a method here to get balance that returns your current balance. I have a method here to deposit money, which allows you to add an amount to your balance, and another method here to withdraw your money, which subtracts an amount from your balance. So let's press shift enter, and let's instantiate the bank account here and get our current balance. You can see that the current balance is 0 because the starting balance is 0. Now let's say if I went ahead and executed the withdraw money method of $100, and then I went and got the balance. Notice here that the program didn't stop you from withdrawing $100, even though your balance is 0. Now this is obviously unwanted behavior. You could withdraw $1 million here, and your bank would go broke, right? So let's raise an exception if the funds requested are greater than the funds available. Now, to do this, you would rewrite the withdrawal method with a test here. If amount is greater than the current balance, then raise an exception, right? A general exception that would return a message, funds requested are greater than funds available. If the funds are not greater, if the amount is not greater than the balance, then it would go ahead and allow you to withdraw the balance. Let's press shift enter here to save this version of bank account, and let's try that same sequence again. And notice here, it raises an exception, and it gives you the instructions here that the funds requested are greater than the funds available. In other words, it didn't allow you to withdraw your funds, and instead it gave you detailed messages, right, of where the exception occurred. So you raise the exception here, and it's telling you this is where you raise the exception because it failed to pass this if statement, and it gives you an exception here. Now this is fine for if you're a programmer and you want to see that the error would occur, right? And this is one way of raising exceptions. Another way of doing the same thing we just did here is to use an assertion. Now, an assertion is one line of code, and it's much easier to read. As you can see here, I have the same withdrawal method. The only difference is I don't have the if statement here. Instead, I have one line that says assert, right? And the assert statement has a condition that is always supposed to be true. And if it's false, then it should return the message that it has after the comma. So here we expect that the amount should always be less than the current balance. So I'm using assert and then parentheses amount less than self.balance. And then I have a comma here for the false condition, right? So if false, then it will tell you withdraw denied because your amount is greater than the current balance. So let's press shift enter on this cell to save this version of the class, and let's try the same code as we tried before. And you can see here that it raises an assertion error. Over up here it raised just an exception, but in here it raised a different type of object called an assertion error, which again tells you detailed instructions of where the error occurred, right? You can see here it occurred on line 9, and it gives you the error message. So it's a different way of raising an exception. The difference here is this is an assertion. A little easier to write, a little easier to read, and you can have multiple assert statements in your code. So if you have code that expects a non-zero value, you would assert value greater than 0, else the error. If you have a code that expects a string, you would say if the value is of type string, else this error. So it's a way of handling your possible scenarios where you have some unwanted behavior. Assertions are heavily used in testing also. Now, this is all fine and good when you're writing your program, but you don't want your users to see this type of message. This is more for your logs. This is more for your developers to see. You may want to write this to a log instead of outputting it to your user. Another thing you can do is what's called exception handling, where just a message would be returned instead of the big error, right? So in exception handling, you have this try, except, and finally block. Now here I am, I'm rewriting the withdrawal money function method here, right? And in here I have the same assert statement, and then I have my return message. The only difference is I have this try. So this try will try the code, and it will execute your assertion error, because let's say if you put an amount greater than the balance, it will give an exception. But in here, you will catch the exception, and you will return just a regular text message without all this noise and details here, which is really more for your logs or for your back-end team to look at, right? This is more the text message that you would probably want to show in a UI, right? And then so this catches it and returns a more elegant message, right, and more text message. And then we have the finally. Finally always executes, no matter if the code has an exception or if the code doesn't have an exception. So let's press Shift Enter to store this version of the class, and let's try the code again. And you can see here I instantiated my account. I deposited $500, and let's say 500, and I withdrew $600, which should give you the assert error. But instead of this big ugly all these lines of code and more log type of message, you get just a simple string: withdraw denied because 600 was greater than your current balance. Now if I were to execute this code again, but this time I'm going to take out $400, right? So I'm going to instantiate my class, I'm going to deposit 500, and I'm going to withdraw 500. Notice that it will give you the success message. $400 were withdrawn from your account. Your account balance is now $100. And notice that the finally also executes. It executes in the code where you have an exception, but it also executes in the code where you have a success scenario. Try these out. Try working with the built-in exceptions. Try raising your own exceptions, and also try the assertions and the try, except, finally block. And as usual, there will be text instructions at the end of this video. Thank you.